He's my son's best friend, and I knew I shouldn't have let it happen. I understand that many may criticize me for what I did, but few understand what it means to be a single mother at 40. My name is Valeria. I'm 40 years old, and 5 years ago my life changed in a devastating way. My ex-husband left me for a younger woman, destroying everything we had built together. Since then, I've lived alone in a small town in the countryside, raising my son and working with sweets and snacks to make ends meet. I closed my heart to love, thinking I would never allow myself to feel anything like it again. But fate has unexpected ways of testing our certainties. Since my ex-husband left us, Hyder, my 21-year-old son, has always been my greatest companion. We have created an open and trusting relationship, without too many rigid rules. He's free to bring friends over and even have parties at home, something I've always seen as a way of bringing us closer together. But this freedom, which seemed harmless, was about to bring something that would change everything. I hadn't imagined that a simple family habit could turn my life upside down. Among Hyder's friends, Henrique had always been special. He grew up in our house, practically as part of the family. At the age of 24, he has become a charismatic and self-assured man. In the past, his jokes and compliments seemed innocent, but over time, something changed. The comments began to take on a different, more direct tone, and I didn't know if it was something in my head or something he really wanted to say. It was then that I realized that his presence brought attention that I didn't know how to deal with. Stay with me until the end and find out everything I did in the bedroom. I'll tell you in great detail.
Click like now and subscribe to the channel to see more stories like this.
For Henrique's mother's 50th birthday, I offered to help prepare the sweets and snacks. It was something I often did, but that day everything was going to be different. Henrique arrived early with the ingredients, and instead of just handing them over and leaving, he offered to help in the kitchen. I thought it would be something simple, an ordinary afternoon's work, so I accepted without much thought. As we cut fruit and mixed pasta, the conversation started off light, full of stories about everyday life. But suddenly the course changed. Enrique mentioned how much he admired my dedication as a mother and wife, something that caught me off guard. "Not everyone can be so strong and beautiful at the same time," he said, with a smile that looked innocent, but had something more to it. I laughed, trying to ignore the impact, but his presence there, so close, began to make me uneasy. The atmosphere in the kitchen changed subtly, and I realized that this moment, which seemed so everyday, carried something that couldn't be ignored. While we were mixing the dough and organizing the ingredients, the conversation began to take directions I hadn't expected. We talked about the party, about Henrique's mother, until he unexpectedly changed the subject. "You know, I've always found mature women fascinating," he said, with a casual tone that made me pause for a moment. Henrique continued, describing qualities he admired: security, experience, natural beauty. The more he spoke, the more I realized that those characteristics fitted me perfectly. I tried to laugh to lighten the mood, but my face was already hot and I felt completely exposed. It wasn't just what he said, but how he looked at me, with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only person there. I was speechless for a few seconds, trying to shift my focus and regain control of the situation. But something was clear. Henrique wasn't just throwing words to the wind, and I didn't know how to react to it. As the conversation went on, something subtle began to change. Henrique's words, once light and relaxed, now carried a different tone, almost as if they were full of hidden intentions. His gaze became more intense, lingering, as if he wanted to see something beyond what I was showing on the surface. "You have an incredible way, Valeria. Always so strong and elegant," he said, without a trace of jest in his voice. I was disconcerted, trying to respond with a smile, but I felt my heart racing. It was something I hadn't felt for a long time, a mixture of nervousness and an unexpected warmth that surged through my chest. Henrique approached me unhurriedly, with a confidence that made me forget the age difference and the fact that he was my son's friend. The dynamic between us had changed, and although I tried to keep it natural, my body and mind were reacting in a way that I couldn't control. The air in the kitchen seemed heavier, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same. As we organized the last details in the kitchen, the silence between us became almost deafening. Henrique stopped stirring the ingredients and looked directly at me, with an expression I had never seen before. "Valeria, I need to tell you something," he began, hesitantly, but with a firm tone. My heart raced, and I didn't know what to expect. I have always been attracted to you, for a long time, but I never had the courage to say anything out of respect for Hyder. His words hit me like a shock, leaving me without a reaction. For a moment I just stood there, feeling my face burn and the air get heavier. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scold him, to remember that he was my son's best friend, but another part, buried for years, felt alive again. There was something flattering about being seen so intensely, something I hadn't felt since before my ex-husband left. However, the weight of that confession left me torn, not knowing what to do next. After Henrique's confession, I tried to act naturally, but every word he said seemed to change the mood in the kitchen even more. Not only did he speak, but he looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race. The physical proximity between us seemed to grow closer with every second, almost as if the space around us had disappeared. Henrique was careful with every gesture, but his gaze and the tone of his voice revealed a disarming sincerity. He didn't need to say anything else for me to understand what was implicit in his every move. I knew this was heading down a dangerous path, too delicate, but something inside me seemed to want to prolong the moment. After years of living an empty and lonely routine, feeling something so intense again was like reliving parts of myself that I had forgotten. My mind struggled to set a limit, but my body seemed unable to obey. The air between us was charged, and every second increased the tension of something I knew couldn't be ignored. The tension in the kitchen was almost palpable, as if the air around us had changed weight. Henrique moved calmly, but there was something in his gestures that seemed full of intent. Every word exchanged, every look sustained, was as if we had crossed an invisible threshold, a point of no return. My heart was beating so fast that I could barely think, while the closeness between us became impossible to ignore. He took a step forward, reducing the distance between us even further, and for a moment, it seemed as if the world around us had disappeared. I knew it was wrong, that there were consequences that couldn't be undone, but I also knew that I hadn't felt something so alive, so intense for years. My mind tried to find a way out, but my body seemed to have already chosen to follow the course of the moment. As he looked at me, with that intensity that said everything without needing words, I simply let the energy that surrounded us decide for us. The silence that took over the kitchen said more than any words could express. Henrique didn't need to speak. His eyes told me everything. There was an intensity in his gaze that made me shiver, a certainty that he wasn't going to back down. The moment seemed suspended, as if time had stopped just for us. My heart was pounding and my mind was screaming to put an end to it, but my body wouldn't respond. For a moment, I considered pulling back, saying something that would bring everything back to normal, but the truth is that I couldn't do it. Maybe deep down, I didn't even want to. There was something about that moment that made me feel alive, something I hadn't experienced for years. The closeness, the warmth that emanated from both of us, was like an electric current that couldn't be ignored. Henrique took another step towards me, and the world around us disappeared. What was happening was inevitable, and even with all the consequences I knew would come, I chose not to interrupt. When it was all over, a silence overtook the kitchen, but it wasn't like before. It was a heavy silence, full of meaning, which made it clear that something inside me, inside us, had changed forever. I looked around, trying to find some trace of normality, but it was impossible. Every gesture, every look exchanged, now seemed charged with an intensity I had never felt before. Henrique looked at me with a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty, as if he also knew that this moment would be marked, regardless of what came next. I couldn't explain how I had let things get to that point. Perhaps it was loneliness, the desire to feel alive again, or the way he made me see myself in a way I hadn't for a long time. But whatever the reason, there was no turning back. The kitchen, once an ordinary and safe place, was now the scene of something I could never forget. Something that had changed not only the environment, but myself. After all, the silence between us seemed to shout truths that neither of us was ready to admit. Henrique looked me straight in the eye, with that same intense gaze that had disarmed me from the start. "I want to do it again," he said, his voice low but full of conviction. My heart raced, torn between desire and fear. I took a deep breath and answered firmly, even though my mind was in chaos. "Henry, this has to stay between us. Hyder mustn't get suspicious in any way." He nodded, but there was something in his smile that made me uneasy, as if that moment wasn't the end, but the beginning of something even more complicated. As he said goodbye, I felt the weight of the secret begin to consume me. As much as I wanted to believe that I could control the situation, the truth was that I wasn't sure of anything. Henrique left, but the tension he left behind stayed with me, giving me the feeling that what we had experienced wasn't really over. Since that day, my life has become a mixture of anxiety and guilt.
Click like now and subscribe to the channel to see more stories like this.
The fear that Hyder will find out what happened to Henrique haunts me every moment. The mere idea that my son could find out that I was involved with his best friend is unbearable. I try to carry on with the routine, smile, talk, act as if nothing has changed, but inside, I'm in pieces. Every time Henrique shows up, the air feels heavier. He acts naturally, as if everything is normal, but I know he notices my nervousness. At night, when everything is quiet, my mind fills with scenarios of how Hyder would react if he knew. Would he forgive me? Would he lose respect for me? I try to justify what happened, telling myself it was a moment of weakness. But the truth is that the weight of this secret is consuming me. It's like carrying a time bomb that could explode at any moment, and I don't know how long I can hide it. Henrique hasn't stopped trying. His messages keep coming, full of innuendo and memories of that moment we shared. "I can't stop thinking about you," he wrote in the last one, and those words echoed in my mind for hours. I feel like it. I can't deny it. Every time I remember how he looked at me, how he made me feel alive again, something inside me screams to give in. But guilt follows, like a heavy chain pulling me back to reality. The fear that Hyder will find out is paralyzing, and every decision feels like a false step. I try to ignore Henry, to pretend that I can put an end to it, but the truth is that part of me still wants to live it again. I'm torn between the desire to break free, to feel something that has been dormant for years, and the responsibility I have as a mother. Henrique insists, and I know that if he continues, I don't know how long I'll be able to resist. I'm on the edge of an abyss, not knowing whether to retreat or let myself fall. Thoughts about the future consume me at every moment. During the day, while I prepare the orders and try to keep to the routine, my mind goes back to that moment with Henrique, reliving every detail as if it were yesterday. Part of me knows that the right thing to do would be to end it once and for all, to put a definitive end to it before anything else happens, before Hyder notices anything. But another part, quieter and more stubborn, can't ignore the desire that still burns inside me. Henry has managed to awaken something that I had long believed to be dead. The memory of how he made me feel wanted and alive still moves me in a way that scares me. I try to convince myself that I can resist, that I'm stronger than this urge, but the truth is that I'm not sure. If Henrique insists, if he shows up again or sends more messages, I don't know if I'll have the strength to back down. It's like being trapped in a labyrinth, where every path seems to lead me back to the same dilemma: reason or passion. Doubt never leaves me, accompanying me like a silent shadow at every moment of the day. Is it really worth risking my relationship with Hyder, my son, for something that may only be fleeting? This question torments me, and as much as I try to push it away, it comes back even more strongly. Henry offered me something I hadn't felt for years: the feeling of being seen, wanted, alive. But at the same time, the weight of this desire is overwhelming. If Hyder found out, how would he react? Would he forgive me? Or would he see me as someone who has betrayed his trust irreparably? I can't stop imagining the consequences, and each scenario seems worse than the other. But then I think of the other possibility: ignoring everything, suffocating what I feel, and continuing with my solitary routine, wondering forever what it would have been like. This uncertainty eats away at me. Which is worse, risking everything and living in the moment, or burying this desire and carrying the doubt for the rest of my life? I find myself paralyzed between two paths, unable to make a decision that defines my next step. Continuing this forbidden romance with Henrique seems as tempting as it is dangerous. The memory of what we experience makes me long for more, but guilt and fear constantly remind me of the risk of destroying everything I have with Hyder. Putting an end to it would be the sensible thing to do. But can I ignore the desire and emotion he has awakened in me? My life, which used to be calm and predictable, now seems like a storm, where every choice can have irreversible consequences. I wonder if it's possible to keep up appearances, to live this secret without anyone noticing, or if, by trying to hide it, I'm just postponing the inevitable. What I do know is that I've never felt so divided, so confused, so alive and so overwhelmed at the same time. Life has never been as complicated as it is now, and the choice I need to make seems as distant as it is impossible. After everything, the only thing left is doubt. I'm caught between the desire to experience something that makes me feel alive again, and the fear of losing everything that really matters. Henry has awakened something in me that I didn't even know existed, but the weight of this secret and the possible consequences are overwhelming. Hyder is my son, my reason for living, and the thought of him finding out makes my heart squeeze. But at the same time, is it worth suffocating my own feelings, ignoring that part of me that longs for something beyond routine and loneliness? Every scenario I create in my mind seems to bring both loss and gain, and I don't know how to choose. So I ask you, what would you do in my place? Would you risk following your heart, even if it meant putting everything at risk? Or would you call it quits before it was too late? I want to know your opinion, because I myself still can't find the answer to this dilemma that consumes me.
This story doesn't end here. Listen to it all by clicking on the exclusive playlist on the right, or click on the video on the left and listen to the best story on the channel.